Well, hello everyone. We're back again. My name is Ricardo McRae, and we're sitting today with Adam Irving, director of the film Off the Rails. Uh, Won an Academy Award. It's an incredible documentary about a gentleman in New York City who has uh, the bad habit of stealing trains. So most people may steal snacks. He's taking trains, buses. He's driven over 100 of them over the years, and he's done extensive amounts of time in prison. And this film explores that. So, do you want to tell us a little bit, set up the clip that we're about to play, or say anything about the film before we run the trailer?
Uh, no, I think the trailer kind of speaks for itself. It sums up the film nicely, kind of the main themes of Darius going in and out of prison, and that he has Asperger's syndrome, and that he's just really, really into transportation.
On a whole new level. So let's take a look at this, and then we'll chat about it. Can you hear that?
My name is Darius McCollum. Over the years, I have operated trains in the New York City subway system, Metro North, New Jersey Transit, and yet I have never been an employee of any of these agencies.
Oh, Manhattan Man is getting a free ride to prison.
McCollum, said to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all things transit-related.
All of his crimes were victimless. He would safely make all of the stops, make the announcements.
He says, I'm volunteering my time, as if he's a high schooler getting community service hours.
Now, he's been picked up 20 times for the same thing.
McCollum claims to have commandeered more than 100 buses for joyrides over the past 30 years.
McCollum has such a lengthy rap sheet of transit-related crimes, he has his own Wikipedia page.
Because I have Asperger's syndrome, I have trouble making friends. I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be picked on. I didn't want to have to be beaten up.
When he was young, when he was assaulted, he lost that sense of value as to who he is. Wearing a uniform creates a sense of value for Darius.
It was like I was married to the MTA.
He can't help it. My son, he doesn't belong there because he doesn't hurt anybody.
While he was in jail, he never got any therapy.
There's a possibility that I can definitely die in jail.
He has been stuck in this revolving door for his whole entire life.
He's an individual that corrections doesn't know how to handle, doesn't want to handle, and doesn't have the money or the support to figure it out.
Well, that is definitely a trailer and a half. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful film. It was very well done, completely thorough. And how long did it take to shoot this?
It took about a year to shoot it, but it was kind of patchy because Darius kept going in and out of jail. So, I could shoot him for a few weeks, and then he'd get arrested, go back for a year. He'd get out. I'd have a few weeks, get arrested, go back for a year. So, in total, I probably only actually had 30 days with Darius, but I filmed for, probably close to a year, getting all those beautiful shots of New York and the subway. And I interviewed, over a dozen people for the film, like Darius's mom, his attorney, his therapist, Asperger's experts, to kind of get a full picture of who this man is.
How did you first hear
I
about
actually
Darius?
just read his Wikipedia article. I was looking up the term foamer, Foamer, and it's like a derogatory term to describe a person who is so obsessed with trains that they foam at the mouth when they see one. So they're called foamers. Yeah. In the UK, they're called train spotters. There's a word for them in Japanese. They're usually men on the autism spectrum that are really into trains. And so naturally, in researching that, I came upon Darius, and the first line of his Wikipedia page said, it's like, Darius McCollum has spent more than half his adult life in prison for impersonating New York City transit workers. And, he's been arrested 32 times for the same crime, never hurt anyone, never damaged any property. And he's got Asperger's syndrome. And I was just like, wow, what an interesting story. It would make a great documentary. And I stayed up till 4 a.m. researching to make sure no one had done a documentary. And when I was pretty confident that there was no movie on Darius, I was like, I'm going to go make this movie. And now 3 years later, it's done.
It's a brilliant piece. And you walk a very fine line, because you're interviewing someone who's going into prison, who's dealing with mental illness, who's on the fringes of society. And how do you balance as a director that line between standing back and being objective or getting involved, and then understanding that there's a human here and we're telling a story, and what about the respect?
Yeah, I would say I balanced it very poorly, in that I was quite sympathetic towards Darius, and I was not always objective, because after a few years of knowing the guy, I became very close with him and quickly realized that he's not a bad person, even though he's a criminal. In other words, he has broken laws, but he's never deprived anyone of anything. He's never hurt anyone or damaged any property. And so I just, because I didn't see him as a bad person, I treated him as a good person. And I made a film that, for the most part, portrays him as a good person, because I think that's accurate. So, perhaps I wasn't always objective, because I grew to really like the guy and thought that his story was very tragic, and that if I made a film that made viewers sympathetic, that perhaps some changes could be made so that he doesn't go to jail for a 33rd time.
Yeah. So where is it?
Sure.
I don't want to give away the ending of the movie, but where is Darius?
As of today, he's in Rikers Island in New York, the main city county jail, and he is awaiting trial. And if he does go to trial and he loses the trial, he could get 15 years to life. But if he pleads guilty, and then he could make a deal with the district attorney and only get 5 to 7 years for a fairly minor transit impersonation crime. So right now his attorney is trying to get him into mental health court instead of criminal court, where he would be sentenced to therapy rather than incarceration. But so far they've declined that request, but they're still trying to appeal.
So what is it like looking at the justice system in the United States and seeing someone that is clearly not a criminal by the definition of what we would expect a criminal to be, but somebody that actually has mental illness and is caught up in this sort of hamster wheel of a system that just doesn't know how to stop, and have someone just say, hang on, like, let's apply a little bit of humanity to this. This guy is absolutely...
Well, what I realized is that even the sort of bad guys in the story, like the prosecutor for the state, the district attorney, they want to help Darius too. They don't want him going in and out of jail. It's costing their taxpayers money. It's taking up their time that they could be spending on real criminals who are actually violent and a threat to society. But they just don't have the resources to give Darius 24/7 therapy. And frankly, they have no guarantee that if they give him therapy, that he won't go and do it again anyway, because incarceration hasn't worked. And usually that's the strongest deterrent for people. So they figure, well, if that's not going to work, then nothing's going to work. And so I realized, like, they're not evil people, those prosecutors that are putting him behind bars. They're just trying to do what they think is the best thing for someone that is, to be honest, somewhat of a threat, because although he's not going to hurt anyone on purpose, he's not officially trained. And if Darius was to crash a subway with 2,000 rush hour passengers, that's very serious. And thankfully it hasn't happened yet, because Darius is very skilled, but they don't want to wait until it does happen.
Right. Wow. What was your first meeting like? This is a question coming from Dr. Vibe, who's in the chat here. What was your first meeting with? So
Darius? It was a really big deal for me because I had spent 6 months exchanging over 100 letters and phone calls with Darius before I met him. And I did a ton of research and invested a lot of money and already started filming. And so I was afraid that if I met Darius and he didn't like me, that was the end of my film project, all down the drain. And then number two, I've never been to jail either as a criminal or as a visitor. So I was kind of scared about the whole process. And Rikers Island is one of the absolute worst correctional facilities in the United States. It's underfunded, it's overcrowded. And the visiting process, to be frank, I thought it was humiliating. I had to strip and, do all just all kinds of graphic things to show that I didn't have anything in certain crevices. And this is all done pretty much in public. And, you have to take your shoelaces and belt off so you don't hang yourself. You can't bring in money or identification. And all of this is because they don't use the glass system. So if there's glass dividing you and the person you're visiting, then you can really bring in whatever you want because you can't give it to that person. But at Rikers Island, you're allowed to have physical contact, which I think is a good thing, but it means that visitors have to go through a 4-hour process of taking buses and going through searches and metal detectors and all of that. So it was actually a very, painful process for me. I'm sure visitors of inmates there eventually get used to it and figure out the system. So it takes less than 4 hours. But I was just like, I can't do this regularly. This is it.
Yeah. What are you doing Saturday?
Exactly. So I finally go through with it, and I sit down with Darius in this big, kind of cafeteria style visitation room. And there's maybe 40 other inmates there with friends and family. And I couldn't believe how normal he was. He's just like this big teddy bear. Everyone to the left, everyone to the right, they're like these big, hard, kind of tatted up guys that look like who you would imagine are, about to spend years in prison for violent crimes. And Darius was just like, hey, how's it going? Like as if he hadn't spent 20 years in maximum security. Like we were just meeting at a supermarket in the banana section, And so I was just blown away. I was just waiting for that kind of mental illness to come through, but it's all kind of under the surface. It's all like there's all kinds of things going on in his head, but even with the Asperger's, he's actually just a pretty normal guy. And I think that's what's so deceiving, that when judges and prosecutors deal with him, they just think, oh, you know what you're doing. You should get 20 years in prison. But he doesn't. He's like an addict. He can't stop himself.
Right. What about, I know you had some time with his family and his mom. Where is she in this whole thing? And where is she in this whole process with her son that's been locked up his life, and a woman that's like
Darius is her only child, so Darius is a real mama's boy. She loves Darius, and imagine having your only child, who you hope would be, the first Black president of the United States. Instead, has spent a third of his life in prison, and she had such high hopes for Darius when he was a baby. I have all kinds of photos and letters. And it just kind of went downhill with each arrest from that Darius had. I guess his mom, slowly lost more and more hope, but was always there for him. She never judged him. She never truly abandoned him. She just kind of slowly, lost hope that he'd be able to change his ways. So she's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And she and Darius's dad moved there in the early 90s when Darius was about 23, and he was in jail at the time. And that's where they went to retire. That's where Darius's mom is from originally. It's a small town. It's quiet. It's very different from New York City, where Darius's mother raised Darius. And it's very far from anything resembling a subway train. So it's actually a great, quiet, bucolic, safe place for Darius to be. The problem is, whenever Darius is released from jail in New York, he's on parole, and he's not allowed to leave the 5 boroughs. So the one place where he shouldn't be is in New York, where all the trains are, but they won't let him leave. So they're setting him up to fail. And his mom is like really old now, well into her 80s, so she is not in the best health, and she can't go to New York, and he can't go down to North Carolina. So again, the criminal justice system has just sort of set Darius up to fail. Because whenever he gets released, he has no money. Who's going to hire a felon, right? It's hard for him to get a job. He's got no home, and he can't even go to his mom.
Yeah, this is a
revolving door.
this is just going to keep happening. Now, what, you know,
Yeah,
and I know
10
you
minutes.
have to go in a couple of minutes. What is the most misunderstood aspect about Darius and Asperger's?
So the most misunderstood aspect about Darius is if you Google him, you'll see tons of New York-based newspaper articles about him that these are like tabloid papers that just call him a transit kook or a train nut or a bus nut. And yeah, and they just kind of sum him up in 3 minutes that he's just this crazy guy who hijacks trains. And hijack is really not the right word. It's a misconception, because hijack is when you use force and violence to commandeer, you know, a vehicle or an airplane. Darius doesn't do that. He just goes to work with his lunchbox and his uniform, signs out the train, collects the fares, returns the vehicle, returns the money, and then does it again the next day. He's not like stealing the train. He's not taking it off the tracks and driving it into a building.
Right.
He's usually doing the route. So I think that's an unfair characterization of him as a hijacker and as this nut. But he's actually very deliberate when he does this. He's like, I'm going to take the M34 bus on its route today, and I'm going to impersonate the guy who's supposed to be doing it, and hopefully I won't get caught. And I'm just taking the passengers safely on their journey. And then with Asperger's, it's hard to say what's misunderstood, because if there's anything I learned, that psychological diagnoses are not black or white. Darius has Asperger's, but he has other mental health issues that mix with what he has. So it's kind of hard to define exactly what his mental health issues are. And now, Asperger's is no longer considered its own diagnosis. It's now called an autism spectrum disorder. So it's on the mild end of a spectrum that includes everything from severe autism, that's people who can't even talk, to people with very mild autism, like people even say maybe Bill Gates has it, people that are very high functioning. Yeah.
Behavior. Right. Like a functioning alcoholic. I can get up, I can go to work, but I have a
and Darius is kind of like that. And if you talk to him, like, it's like people with Asperger's, one of the characteristics is they're not able to make very good eye contact, but Darius can make good eye contact. So a lot of the Asperger's traits that he has are kind of mild or hidden. So at first glance, you don't really think of him as your typical kind of Rain Man autism kind of guy.
Right. Wow. So what's been the most challenging thing for you in shooting this film? Because it sounds like it's a myriad of heartbreak and stress and work, and maybe we can meet. And what's been something that's really been surprising and positive about this?
So the challenges would be that, even though I grew up here in Toronto in Canada, I now live in LA, and Darius is in New York. So anytime I need to get to him, 6-hour flight, hotel room, bringing all my equipment, hiring crew, it gets expensive, Like if there's some new development, I can't just get in my car and film it. That would take, 10 days or whatever. Number two, Darius is almost always behind bars, and you can't just like text a guy in jail. You have to send a letter in the mail. It takes a week, and then he sends one back. That takes another week. So it's 2 weeks to get any kind of written response. And number three, when Darius is out of jail, you're dealing with a guy who's got mental illness, who's been kind of damaged by 20 years of incarceration. He's hard to deal with sometimes. He's, kind of stubborn, and sometimes he acts kind of childish. He's sort of like a little kid that's never grown up. And when you're dealing with that kind of personality, it's, it can kind of be difficult. Positive, I would just say the response that I've gotten from people in showing my movie and sharing my story. I was so afraid that they would see Darius as this like crazy guy that should be behind bars, that, even though he's a nice guy, he really, he should know better, and he should be locked up. And I would say, 10% of people, if you read reviews online, not reviews, but comments that people write, they'll say, lock this guy up. I guess more kind of right-wing people who believe that all,
But sort of this flippant,
Yeah. So it's so touching to see that people really respond well to Darius. People that are not African American, that have no connection to Asperger's or trains, that just as a universal human story of an injustice really respond to it well and really feel for Darius. And that's really what a good movie should do. It should make you feel something, whether it's scared in a horror movie or laugh in a comedy or feel emotional in this documentary. You want them to feel something. You know, it shouldn't just be a news story where you're like, okay, there was a cat in a tree and they rescued it, you know.
Right. Well, Adam, thank you. This has been truly enlightening. We've spent about 30 minutes together. And where can people see this film? I know it's the international premiere. When is that, and where can they see it, and how can people get tickets?
Sure. So any locals in the Toronto area can see the film at the Hot Docs International Documentary Film Festival, which is going on right now. And there's going to be 4 screenings of Off the Rails on May 4th, May 6th, May 7th, and May 8th. And the exact times and locations can be found at hotdocs.ca or on the movie's website, which is offtherailsmovie.com. And offtherailsmovie.com lists all the festivals that the film has played at and where it's coming up next. It's going to be playing the San Francisco Documentary Festival next month, and eventually touring all over North America and even a few stops in Europe. And then eventually, if all goes well, it will come to iTunes and Amazon and Netflix and home video where it can be streamed and downloaded. But that's not going to be for at least 6 months. So in the meantime, just keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook. It's Off the Rails Doc is the handle for Twitter and Facebook, and that's the best way to do it.
And I put the
Thanks
link
so much,
in
Ricardo.
the chat, so
Thank
that
you.
will be there. The link will also be below this video for the movie as well as Hot Docs, so you can go there, you can get your tickets, see this film. I highly recommend it. It's awesome. It's a compelling story. It's not your regular documentary that's boring. It will, take your heart off the rails. You'll cry, you'll laugh. It'll be great. So that's all for us today. We'll see you next time, and
Bye, guys.
have a good one.